or any parent, and they're not connected there, but they're also not connected to their parent. And then when you look at it, that child could just disappear. You know, a stranger comes, they don't want to go by them. A parent comes, they don't want to go by them. And so that is like a resistance to the parent and a resistance to the stranger. And that develops them into some really avoidant adolescents and some avoidant adults. But that's a conversation for another day. But this is just to say that the emotional attachment and availability of the parent to the child now allows for them to be or to feel secure and to build trust with the caregiver from a very early age, right? But when we have those parents who don't necessarily understand how important it is for the child to have them present and to have them around, then what it does is that it creates some confusion for the children, right? So, and I think when I say this, I think about those parents who are absentee parents. I think about the experiences where children are born to workaholic parents. I think about those parents who are abusive emotionally and verbally, and they get very frustrated very easily with their children. And then I also think about narcissistic parents who believe that, you know, their child must develop this way because in their mind, their child is special and you have to be special, and they expose them to so much pressure at an early age that it develops a real weird attachment style between parent and child. And so the understanding of core emotions, emotional communication and processing is really messed up for the child, and it leads to some developmental issues. And when we have children who are unable to process and communicate complex emotions or combinations of emotions, what that does is that it leads the child or the children to feel overwhelmed. And when children feel overwhelmed, this leads them to throw tantrums and have meltdowns. And that's what I want us to segue into. We're going to segue now into this whole thing about, you know, negative emotions, which we are putting a name to them. We're calling them tantrums and meltdowns for the sake of this conversation. But before that, you know, I want us to make a note if you're making notes, or just remember this key idea. Children cannot easily process and communicate complex emotions. So they have to depend on their caregivers for connection, for empathy, and for resolution. In other words, because children are developing and some of that you can't rush, you just have to, you know, as they're exposed to the world and you are doing your best as a caregiver, understand that if a child should go to throw a tantrum or having a meltdown or is experiencing some extreme anger or sadness or so on, the child is not necessarily aware of everything that they're doing. And so they are looking for the caregiver to come in and connect with them, to show them empathy, to show them that, you know, I care, that your cries matter, your screams matter, your joy matters, your little accomplishments matter. And so you can empathize with them. And most importantly, when they feel like they are being stressed out and overwhelmed, they are depending on their adults, their assigned adults, to give them some resolution, because they don't know what's going on in their little minds, right? Little minds. So I want us now to segue into this section talking about negative emotions, and we're going to take a closer look at tantrums and meltdowns. Now, even as an adult, I still see tantrums and meltdowns. And I mean, doing mental health work, it's really interesting to see tantrums and meltdowns being played out in adults. Because very often people think that tantrums and meltdowns are only things that children do, or even teenagers. But the thing is, tantrums and meltdowns go all the way up to you being an adult person, feeling overwhelmed, and just not knowing how to really verbalize what's happening to you. So everybody could experience a tantrum and a meltdown, and I want us to take a little look at how it works for children, for kids. But before that, again, let's root or ground this part of the discussion in the Word of God. And we're going to look at Proverbs 15:1, which simply says, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Gentle answer turns away wrath, but the harsh word stirs up anger. That's important for parents and caregivers to listen to, because it sets the tone for what we're going to look at. Now, I see this little girl and I have a little story to share with you. I remember when I was a teenager, I could have been about 15. And for those of you in Trinidad, you would know about Citygate. You know, that's a transportation hub. And I remember I was there, it was close to Christmas time. And, you know, school was closing. And, you know, I was there on the platform waiting for my bus or my van to go home. And there was this little girl and her mom on the stand. And the mom had purchased a bag of grapes for her. And this child wanted this, she wanted these grapes so badly. She was asking the mom for the grapes. The mom was telling her, no, she can't have the grapes. And she was asking for the grapes, pulling at the mom's dress, asking for the grapes. And then it started to intensify when she recognized that the mom was not, her mom wasn't paying attention to her. She started to stamp. She started to scream. She threw off her bag. She dropped her lunch kit in a vile way. And I think the worst thing that she had done, which kind of like was the straw that broke the camel back, is she started to urinate on herself. As you say in Trinidad, she peed herself. And she was doing all of this because she wanted some grapes. And the mother was saying, you will get the grapes when you get home. It was so embarrassing for everybody to observe the scene. But I think it was so interesting seeing this mother being patient all the while, you know, holding her, talking to her, coming on to her very closely, telling her that she shouldn't behave like that. But that child was just doing the most, as we say. And when she peed herself, the mother couldn't take it anymore. And the mother had to discipline her right then and there in front of everybody. So it was a whole scene, a whole drama. But this was basically the face of the little girl that we had seen. And now, you know, as an adult, understanding more clearly about what had happened in that situation is important for us to talk about it. So, tantrums, the first thing I want us to talk about, right? But before that, let's lay down the fact that, let's put a reminder that anger is a normal emotion, right? It's so strange and so scary to see how far some people go to not experience anger, to the point where either they bottle in, brood, holding everything until the point comes where they explode, and it's very unhealthy and very dangerous. Or some people go to the opposite direction where anything that is potentially making them angry or bringing them a negative vibe, shut it down. They come with this false positivity. Everything is good. I'm happy. I'm all right. And it's a very unrealistic way to live life. So we see that anger is a normal emotion. So normal that the word of God tells us, be angry and sin not. Be angry, but sin not. So it means that being angry, you know, experiencing feelings of anger, this is very normal. And it's going to happen to everybody, especially to children, right? And children, when they feel powerless, when they feel like they are vulnerable, when they feel like they're being unfairly treated, and especially misunderstood, and they're unable to process, one, what's happening exactly, or two, they don't have the emotional vocabulary to tell you exactly how they feel, how they're being made to feel, why they don't like what's going on, then children just go to the extreme. Because this inability to express this overwhelming feeling that they have, it just manifests as anger. And their way to show that they are not in control of what's happening and they don't like the fact that they're not in control and they want the situation to change, they show that in the form of a tantrum and or a meltdown. So let's take a closer look at what a tantrum is. So a tantrum, right, when I ask people what a tantrum is, some people might say, well, yeah, that's just when you're getting undramatic and you're over. If we have desires or needs that are not being met, and more so, if they feel like they want to communicate something, but they don't have the vocabulary for it, then what we're going to see is a disruptive behavior or an emotional outburst, because essentially they are trying to get the caregiver's attention to say, please, look at me, listen to me, focus on me. I have a need or I have a desire and I want something to be done about it, right? Interestingly, tantrums usually come in the second year of life, coming down towards the end of year 2. So it's like a terrible, what do you call it, terrible 2s and 3s. And tantrums really manifest there primarily. And in that age bracket, 2 and 3 is expected. I mean, I tell anybody who has a 1-year-old or a 1-year-old on the way to 2, if you have not experienced a tantrum, get ready for it, it's coming. Because 2s and 3s, that's when they're developing and experiencing complex emotions. And complex emotions are essentially a combination of the primary emotions. So if a child is angry and sad, if a child is angry and afraid, if a child is disgusted and sad, all of these complex emotions without the emotional vocabulary to talk about it, they are just going to let out, either be very disruptive in their behavior or there's going to be an outburst, but essentially they're asking for your attention. But while it's expected in the years of 2 and 3, interestingly, tantrums go all the way into adolescence. And there's such a concept called terrible teens, right? So you see now that there are children who throw tantrums at 2 and 3, even 4, and then there's a period of lull around 6, 7, 8, 9. But then as they're coming out of childhood and crossing over into adolescence, there now we have this whole, you have the typical adolescent factors coming into play. We have the entitlement, we have the self-centeredness, we have this feeling that the world revolves around them because, I'm looking for independence now and I'm being exposed to friends and this friend could do that and why I'm not able to do that and this friend could go here, why I can't do that. So that's this set of new factors now coming out in adolescence from 13 and up. We see now there's a relapse into tantrum throwing, right? And that phase is called the terrible teens because who could be more rebellious than teenagers who know exactly what they're doing, who to a large extent know exactly what they want to express, but because they are aware that their needs are not being met, when they throw the tantrums, it tends to be a bit more intentional and it tends to be a bit more manipulative. But we're coming to that, all right? So for those parents and caregivers and anybody who is supporting the raising of a child, you may ask yourself, what exactly does a tantrum look like? So a tantrum looks like stubbornness. You're telling them to do something and there's an outright defiance against what you are telling them to do. They're being defiant and they're being stubborn. That's a tantrum. Then you have a situation now where they are crying and screaming. It's loud crying, loud screaming, attention grabbing, angry ranting. That's a tantrum. And then we have those children who go as far as expressing their anger through hitting and physically violent behavior. And so it's very important when we see what is happening and we observe what is happening that we first identify it and two, we tap into a particular skill set to be able to know, hey, I see what's happening here and I know what needs to be done. However, silent temper tantrums are real. Because I know there's somebody listening and they say, well, I have a child who, I know the child gets angry and so on, but maybe my child doesn't scream and cry and rant and embarrass me in public, but what they might do is become very silent and very dismissive. And so silent temper tantrums are real. And as children who understand that, okay, my explosion may not be the most persuasive thing here, so I will do the opposite and I will go internal, I will implode, I will go inside, hold everything inside, and I will show my stubbornness and my defiance, but it's not going to be in a rude way, but it's still disrespectful because it's not engaging with your caregiver and it's not responding to the questions or the concerns that are being raised in the situation. So silent temper tantrums are real for children. And interestingly, adults, when it comes to our age and stage, I'm sure everybody has done it, everybody has experienced it, everybody has been on the receiving end of it. A silent temper tantrum for a child is what we as adults know as a silent treatment. So you can't get your way, or you don't like what's being done here, we give the silent treatment. I have nothing to say to you. I will act as though you don't exist. And it's interesting for adults, adults with a larger set of independence, I guess you can do that. But for a child who depends on their parents for food, for shelter, for warmth, for money, for just sustenance and the whole, to see a child doing a silent temper tantrum, trying to act as though the caregiver doesn't exist, is kind of counterproductive. But nevertheless, it's important for us to know that these are real and we know how to identify it. But as we said, for children, 2, 3, anybody 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that age bracket there is very normal. It's actually expected for a child to throw tantrums. But anything beyond the age of 8, it points to a deeper developmental issue, right? Because 6 to 8 is when children are now working out their reasoning. Their logic is being, around. And I remember I've read, you can fact check me on it, but I remember Ellen White was saying that from age 8 or so, that's when your logic is really developed and a child is able to know exactly what they are doing from age 8. Unless that child is somewhere on the spectrum or that child is having a real sensory disorder. But other than that, most children from the age of 8 onward, they know exactly what they're doing. And so the tantrum throwing is a bit more intentional and requires some more attention because they're doing things that are not necessarily expected for their age, right? So some things for us to remember when we think about tantrums. One, a tantrum is temporary, right? Tantrums don't last forever. I mean, somebody on this call may have experienced a tantrum with a child today, just before this Zoom. They may have experienced it just yesterday. And so you recognize that a tantrum will last only for a period of time. So it's temporary, right? But it's important for us to remember that tantrums always signal a deeper need. Even if you think it's attention seeking, even if you think, oh my gosh, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this again? Why are you embarrassing me like this? Why are you doing that? We're going back to one of the earliest points that were made today is the fact that children are very dependent on their caregivers and their assigned adults for attention, for confirmation, and for reassurance. So, I mean, if they're not getting it from you, who will they get it from? Who should they get it from? And so as a parent, it's very important for us to know that we first, and I'm saying we because I'm identifying, we first should pay attention to our children. We should be so in tune with our children that we should be able to almost commentate or narrate what's happening with our children's behavior as somebody else is looking in. And you tend to see that too when we have child-led play. So sometimes some parents would put their children to lead and they put their children to play and they almost kind of like confirm what the child is doing. So the child kicks the ball and they say, oh, wow, you kicked the ball really well today. And the child says, yes, I kicked the ball. And you see that, yes, it's child-led development. But when in that child-led environment, or even when you try to give children a set of independence, it's important for us to remember that they are working out complex emotions, combinations of emotions. They are adapting to stimuli. They also experience psychological pain. So if parents are not around, they experience that absence. If parents are having issues, they experience that absence. If parents are workaholic and not giving them the attention and the time that they need, they experience that psychological pain. And so whenever our children throw tantrums, it's always because there's a deeper need. It's always because there's a deeper meaning. So I want to share this little hack, this life hack, right, with all adults, caregivers, anybody who's dealing with teens and children, who throw tantrums on a regular basis. The length of a tantrum is influenced by the reaction of the persons around. A tantrum, to a large extent, is intentional, and its intention is to get attention. So very often when a child is throwing a tantrum, you may recognize that they look around because they want to see who is going to respond to me. Is anybody paying attention to me? And so I remember one time with one of my godchildren, she was crying and the mom was just there very cool. And I was like, so you're not going to run to her like she's crying? And she's like, nah, she's looking for some attention. Watch and see. Give her about 2 minutes and she's going to be over. And truth be told, in 2 minutes time, the child was back up and playing. Back up and playing because they recognized that the attention in the way that they expected to get it was not given. But what my friend did do after a while, she went and she said, are you ready to talk now? Are you ready to share with mommy what is happening? And so on. And so you recognize that instead of responding to her overwhelming anger and her emotional outburst with overwhelming anger and emotional outburst, she decided to give it some time, not react, but respond, and respond in a way that's showing her, I care about what's happening to you. Let's talk about it, right? So a tantrum is something that's very temporary from a child, even from a teenager. A tantrum is temporary, but more importantly, what a tantrum is all about is getting your attention or bringing your attention to a deeper emotional need, right? I know that some parents say, well, Use a big boy or use a big girl, you're 16 years or you're 17 years of age. You don't need me to give you no emotional attention. But actually, remember when we spoke about the attachment styles? A developmentally challenged teenager is likely because there was some avoidances or there was some unavailability on the part of the parent when that child was younger. And so they find themselves all through their transition in childhood into their adolescence, still trying to get their parents' attention.
Yeah.
All they want is their parents' attention. But then we have this other side of it, almost further along on the continuum of anger, and that's a meltdown. And the thing is, a meltdown is way worse than a tantrum, because when you have come to the point of a meltdown, it's because you are not in control of what's happening. So that's why some people, you see them just crying, they're just crying, they're just crying, and they're just shaking, and it's almost like they're convulsing on themselves, and they're hyperventilating and all of these different things. That's a meltdown. So meltdowns are those extreme full body reactions that we give to severe, overwhelming emotional distress. And it's interesting that some adults, we have this as well. I mean, life is hard, stress is real, adulting is not easy. And so when we feel overwhelmed and we feel bombarded, we have meltdowns. I mean, just last night I was on the verge of a meltdown. I shared with Letitia, I was like, girl. And she's like, what is happening? Because I was very silent. And I would say, I am overwhelmed. And I'm experiencing myself being overwhelmed. But because of my emotional intelligence and because of, just having a skill set that I impart to people to help them understand how to do it, I recognize that for me, I was supposed to change my environment and change my sensory overload so that I cannot go full steam ahead into having a meltdown. Right? Meltdowns may look like uncontrollable crying. You're there trying to ask the person what is going on and they just can't stop crying. They just crying, they just don't know what's happening. They don't know what's happening. It's uncontrollable. And they're hyperventilating. That's a meltdown. They don't know what's going on. They have no control over what's going on. But interestingly, there's the other side of that meltdown continuum, and that is the angry side. So some people, when they have a meltdown, they cry and they just are self-deprecating and they want pity and they're just pitying themselves and they just don't know what's happening. That's that end. But there's the other end of a meltdown, which is a person losing control. They break things, uncontrollable rage, they fling things, they mash up the computer, do everything. And then it's just like, wow, there is no way of controlling that. And that's correct. There is no way for us to intervene or to try to interject in a child or a teenager having a meltdown by just coming to use talk techniques. Because persons with meltdowns, they don't know what's happening. And so when we think about meltdowns, right, we think about the fact that meltdowns are generally connected to triggers in the environment. And triggers is a thing that we speak a lot about in mental health. And it's important for every adult to know what their triggers are. And this is important too for parents because parents raising children who are exposed to triggers, but you as a parent, as an adult, you also have your triggers. So imagine your child is having a meltdown and your trigger as an individual is when you see people very angry and very out of control that you get afraid and you start to panic and you get out of control. And then just before you look at it, the parent is having a meltdown, the child is having a meltdown. That's it. Everything just all falls down. Right? It's important for us when we think about meltdowns and we see a meltdown in action. It's important for us to look around at the environment, do an analysis of the environment and determine what is there in this environment that may be affecting, that may be causing this. What could have happened, right? Because meltdowns, this is another life hack, meltdowns, unlike tantrums, meltdowns tend to subside when there is less or different sensory input. In other words, the end of a meltdown is when this person has either cried themselves to sleep or they have gotten so angry to the point where they're very tired and then their body just stops and it shuts down. Whereas a tantrum is stopped when a reaction is given. A tantrum is stopped when attention is given. But with a meltdown, it's not about attention. It's about really controlling the environment so that it can cause the person to experience a nervous system reset. Having a nervous breakdown is a real thing. So when persons say, I'm having a nervous breakdown, or I had a nervous breakdown, it's real because we live in a world that's highly sensory. TVs, a lot of images, social media, we're bombarded with images. I mean, music is loud in the environment. Parents are shouting, parents are screaming. You grow up in a house with plenty of arguments. Oh my gosh, that's sensory overload. And so when somebody is being bombarded with sensory overload, what happens? They have a nervous breakdown, which leads to a meltdown. But the life hack for the meltdown is don't try to intervene in a meltdown with talk, because talk techniques don't work with a meltdown. What you can do to support somebody who's having a meltdown, even a child, is to either change them to a different location, which tends to be calmer, quieter, more reserved, so that they can have less sensory input. And by having less sensory input or less sensory overload, this person is able to either pacify themselves to sleep, or they're just able to calm down and control their breathing and come back down. And then, of course, you can reward them with a nice little hug at the end of it. All right. So a tantrum is intentional, and a tantrum is usually because I'm trying to get your attention in some way. And so I am doing this thing intentionally because I want your attention. Whereas a meltdown is uncontrollable. It's overloading, sensory overload. I just have no control of what's happening over me. I just feel like everything has come down on me. I am totally powerless, totally vulnerable. And so I need a break. I need a change of environment. I just need to rest, right? So those are the two main manifestations of negative emotions or anger emotions that we have in children. We have the tantrums and we have the meltdowns. But the key idea, stick away from this part, is there's a big difference between angry feelings and aggressive behavior. And so as caregivers, as parents, it's important for us to help our children, first by example, but second by the training and the communication and the building of trust. It's important for us to help our children understand that you can feel angry, but you're not allowed to behave aggressively. You can have angry feelings, that's okay, but you are not entitled to give off aggressive behavior and believe that that's okay. You communicate anger, but you control your aggression. And that works even for teenagers and it works for adults. Even as adults, there are things that anger us in the workplace. I mean, with family members, with just society in general. We could be angry about it, but we don't have to behave aggressively. And we know that when we behave aggressively, there are consequences for us as adults. Much more so should there be consequences for children who believe that they are so entitled that they could give off aggressive behavior and not be held accountable for it. That's not true. Big difference between angry feelings and aggressive behavior. Let the children know, or help them understand rather, that it's okay to have angry feelings, but it's never okay to give off aggressive behavior. Because if that is left unchecked, then you have some very entitled teenagers and you have some very dysfunctional adults. That's another topic for another time. So let's look at the last part of our discussion today. And we're going to look at some practical ways that we can manage emotions in the home, right? Because at the end of this, what we're looking for is trying to improve emotional communication in the home to the point where everybody is living a more peaceful life, right? I know that there are some situations where if children perhaps may have ADHD, children may be on the spectrum for autism, or they may have learning disorders. It's not that easy to just manage emotions. It's not just that easy to manage meltdowns and tantrums and so on. And so you would need advanced emotional support and advanced professional support. But in general, these are some practical things that we can do to manage and improve emotional communication in the home so that we can clearly put the check and the difference between angry feelings and aggressive behavior. So the last scripture to orient us is taken from Isaiah chapter 1, verse 18, and the Bible says, "Come now, and let us reason together, saith the Lord. Come now and let us reason together. And so the Lord tells us that when things are unclear to you, come to me and let us sit and reason and let us talk about it. And you can tell me your negative feelings and experiences and the things that you're unclear about. And so God gives us as caregivers and parents a pattern against which we should use to support our children, which is bringing them into a space that's safe and that's comfortable for them to be able to reason, for you both to be able to reason, right, together. So the first practical tip is that parents and caregivers are expected to model appropriate behavior because children copy caregivers. Now, I say that there is no such thing as a perfect parent, but there is a such thing as a proactive parent. And so parents, if you know that you have some emotional challenges, you have some mental challenges, it's important for you as an individual to get that help for you first, because the quality of individual that you are shapes or influences the quality of parent that you become. The quality of parent that you are shapes the quality of child that develops. The quality of child is to a large extent, the quality of an adult that that person will raise to be reflective of you. And so if a parent knows that they have some emotional or relational challenges that they need to work out, it would be in the child's best interest that they get the support and they get the help to become a better person first for themselves so that they can support their child in a more appropriate and a healthier way when it comes to emotional development, right? Because what we are seeing here, when we spoke about the attachment, when we spoke about, just children depending on the caregivers for communication and confirmation, when a child sees what you do and how you handle a situation, that is an emotional imprint. They believe that, oh, if my mom does this, I can do this too. If this is how my mom handles angry feelings, I can handle that too. So if you're at home and your child hears you on a call and you are angry and you're slamming down things and you're slamming the table and you're stamping and you're throwing a fit as you handle your angry feelings, then that child is going to say, oh, okay, well, then that's how I can behave as well. So if I go into a setting with my friends or I go into a setting with my peers and something happened that makes me angry, I now see my mommy she act a fool. So I can act a fool too. I see my daddy, when he get upset, he is just at a cuss and make noise and disrespect my mother and do everything. And well, mommy's okay with it, it seems. And she cries, but she living. So I know that when I go out with my friends and something happens, I go into my circles and somebody gets me angry, I could cuss and I could get on like that because I have learned it first at home. And then in the instances with the parents who say, well, I have never shown my children that. But if you allow devices, if you allow TV shows, if you allow programs to raise your children where there may be inappropriate handling or expression of emotions, then that's what is going to be imprinted on your kids. So ultimately, it falls back on the caregiver or the parent to ensure that there is appropriate emotional handling and communication in the home first from themselves so that their children have something that they can feel proud that they would copy after. Next practical tip is going back to differentiating between the angry feelings and the aggressive behavior so that you know how to support. Remember we said that when there's a meltdown, you can't interject in a meltdown with talk because that doesn't work. A meltdown requires a change of environment so that there's no sensory overload. But for the tantrum in particular, which is trying to get your attention, what we could do is we can frame our intervention there in a calm way, not matching feelings, not showing, hey, I's the parent in here and I's the big one in here and I will not show you who's the boss. No, that doesn't work. It honestly doesn't. I know some of us may say, well, I get relics and I get real bossing around for my parents and I'm okay. But there may be some secondary trauma, some untapped trauma that we have not yet uncovered. But it's important for the caregivers to support the children, framing the conversation or the intervention in 3 simple questions. The first one is what? And there, what you're trying to do is determine what's wrong, what's happening, what are you trying to say? The second question is why? And that why is, why are you upset? Why are you crying? Or why are you behaving like this? Going back to the first question, what is wrong? And so if you recognize that as you have intervened and you are being assertive, not aggressive to the child, then you are able to ask the child, dependent on their stage of development, so where do we go from here? Now that you have behaved like this and now that you have my attention, where do we go from here? What are you trying to achieve? What are you looking for? And I know that there are some parents who say, I already do the what, why, where technique, but sometimes I overhear, sometimes I've overheard parents doing the what, why, where with the intervention, but the assertiveness is actually coming across a bit abusive, because you are almost trying to coerce the child, into a better form of behavior by coming down on them. Well, what are you getting on so for? Well, you want to get something to cry for? What are you getting on so for? Why are you getting on so? And so it is intervention. It is giving them a response to their call or cry for attention, but it's not in the best way that can support their positive development, right? So ask the what, ask the why, ask the where, and so together you can come up with suggestions. You know your children, you know what things make them happy, you know what environmental changes that you can make, not necessarily giving in to your child in a super flexible or malleable way, but you know what you can do to change, and to ensure that your child's behavior changes without you having to descend into the realm of abuse. And then it brings us to this very important one. Anybody knows that as a therapist, as a coach, as a friend, as a husband, as a manager, as any role, any hat that I wear, I talk about boundaries. And there are some homes, interestingly, where there are not very clear boundaries, which should outline what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And so boundaries, especially in this context for children, boundaries simply help set some very, very clear expectations to everybody, both for the parent and for the child, of what we accept as good and what we are not accepting. I know that there are some parents who say, we can talk about anything, just watch your tone, watch how you address me. Do not call me by my first name. I am not Heather or Sandra to you. I am mommy, right? Don't call me by my first name. Don't jump out yourself and say, hey, you. There are clear boundaries that let children know this is as far as you could come based on your age and stage, and you can't cross this. And so those boundaries help us, everybody, to deal with emotional challenges, and it also helps us to disengage from manipulative tactics, right? We know that, as you say, especially with teens who struggle with that self-centeredness and that entitlement and this feeling that the world revolves around them, they can be very, very tricky, very manipulative. And so in order to guard against that, boundaries being set very clearly by the parent lets the children know you can come as far as this. We could talk about different things, but it must be in a context of respect, and it's of course going to be in a context of love. Now, this is where some parents fall down. This is where some caregivers fall down, and it's on the point of follow through. We have to follow through, because when you set boundaries and then there's a boundary violation and nothing happens, what it does to the person who's testing the boundary is they recognize, oh, I can get away with that. And then you recognize that in some homes, there's a dynamic of good cop, bad cop. Not necessarily intentionally a teamwork between parents, but children, because they are paying attention to you from the time they are born, they know who they can get away with certain things. A child knows that if I go to mommy with this, her boundary is flexible. But if I go to daddy with this, nah boy, his boundary is firm. Or if I go to daddy with this, his boundary is flexible, I will get away. But if I go to mom, she's the disciplinarian in the house, so I won't get away. And so it's important for parents first to have that unit, that teamwork, so that they can present a united front in love against the manipulative tactics of children, especially teenagers, So following through would mean that when there is a boundary violation, when there is an intentional testing of the boundary, there must be a consequence for it, right? Because when we have parents who are super flexible with their children, we see situations where flexibility breeds familiarity, and we know what happens to familiarity. Familiarity breeds contempt, right? So some parents, especially if it is a child, a parent who's absent in the home for whatever reason, if it's a situation where parents have been divorced and so they want to win their children's affection or love, or they want to be seen as a better parent or whatever the case is, they may overcompensate with their flexibility. And yes, they set up boundaries, but they're not really firm with the boundaries because I'm trying to win my child's affection. And I know a lot of us have condemned silently and not so silently parents who we say, she trying to be she child friend, or he feel he and his child is best friends. And we judge people like that because what we are seeing is a level of flexibility or familiarity between the parent and the child. If that works for their home, it does. But if you know that it does not work for your home and too much flexibility is causing issues, then the boundaries that you set, we need to be firm with those boundaries. We need to follow through. And if there is unhealthy behavior, then we reform that unhealthy behavior with corrective consequences. And I'm using my words very clearly. I'm not telling anybody how to discipline. I'm not telling anybody what to do, what not to do, because the Bible clearly says, spare the rod, spoil the child. But the Bible doesn't say, use the rod and abuse the child. Use the rod and take out all of your anger and your rage on the child to the point where your child develops trauma, PTSD, becomes very malleable and very vulnerable to abuse in the future because their parents have abused them from at home, right? So sparing the rod and spoiling the child, in other words, speaking to discipline, means that when there's unhealthy behavior, again, distinguishing between angry feelings and aggressive behavior, reform that with corrective consequences. And some of the corrective consequences could be as simple and effective as privations. In other words, let me take away some privileges from you. You love your phone? No phone. You love your devices? Thank you, I'll take these devices. You won't have them for a week because I need you to reform your behavior. However, when there is healthy behavior, when there is compliant behavior, when there's just positive emotional communication and positive behaviors from the child in the home in response to the rules that are outlined and the boundaries that are set, we can reward that with positive consequences. And you know the things that make your children happy. So I know some parents who they observe their children just being great children. And they'll be like, wow, all right, cool, let me do something special for them. I'll maybe get a pizza, or I'll take you to the beach, or whatever I know that makes you happy. I seek to make you happier because I am rewarding healthy behavior with positive consequences. Now, in our Caribbean setting, not many of us have been raised in a home where when there was healthy or compliant behavior, there were positive consequences. It wasn't an intentional effort by a lot of our Caribbean parents. And so what a lot of us know is that when I give trouble, I will get some licks. When I do something wrong or test a boundary, they will get in my tail. However, when I do something right, was there any rewarding? Was there any acknowledgement? Was there any affirmation? And so even in not rewarding healthy behavior, we can't let our children run the risk of developing a complex where they seek validation and affirmation from people outside the home to a very excessive amount, right? So we need to be very careful with that. And the last practical tip that I want to share with us as I bring my part of the discussion to the close is taking the time to build trust. From the early stage, as we spoke about, coming out of infancy, going into toddlerhood, and becoming young children, and then crossing over into adolescence, all the while, what your children need from you, what children need from us as more advanced human beings, they just need to know that they can feel safe with us. And they need to feel that they could trust us. And so I want to encourage everybody today to take the time and make the concerted effort to build trust with your children. Spend time with your children. Play with your children. Show interest in their interests. In this part, it's not about making them interested in the things that you think that they should be doing. So you want your child to play sports, so you're forcing them into sports and you want them to be interested in it. And then when they are resistant to that, you feel like they're being disrespectful, or you feel like you ain't listening to me. It's not necessarily that, but it could simply be that the thing that you're trying to get them interested in, they're not interested in. And so, you know, a healthy parenting relationship or caregiver relationship would challenge the adults to show interest in the children's interest, even at 2, at 3, show interest in the things that they're interested in. I read a quote last week and it said, learn to listen when your children talk to you about the small things. Because when the bigger aspects of life come, they want to know that they can talk to you about those things as well. And so our children need compassion from us. They need us to be compassionate. And most importantly, they need us to be able to talk to them. And I want to reinforce the point here, especially to parents, to first take the opportunity or the opportunities that are presented to get the help for yourself first. There are a lot of parents who are doing a real disservice to children because they were just not ready. And again, you can never be perfectly ready to be a parent or to be a perfect parent. But as you said, you can be prepared and you can be proactive. And one thing we know God is coming back for is a prepared people. And if he's coming back for a prepared people, he expects you, as you have been given the task and you have been enlisted as a steward over children, because children are really a heritage from the Lord. They belong to the Lord. So as you have been entrusted the task as a steward, it's important for you first as the adult and caregiver to be emotionally regulated, to be emotionally sound, to have the tools and techniques that would make you a better person first for you, but then of course improve the quality of parent that you are for your child, and then improve their development as they move forward, right? I'm reminded too that anger is healthy, anger is normal, but we have to differentiate continually between angry feelings, which are normal and come based on your circumstance, angry feelings and aggressive behavior. Again, aggressive behavior should never be condoned, but angry feelings should always be communicated and always be, receptive of some compassion. So guys, that was me to you today. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for your attention, and I pray that God adds his blessings to this session today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Dallison. We are open for some questions. I know that some of you would have posted questions in the chat. So we have Chesid and Amelia who are going to throw the questions for you, Dallison, so you can answer them. Chesid, you can go ahead.
Okay, so let's not waste any more time. I would go instead of Chesid, right? So the first question is, how do psychological or neurological issues impact children's ability to manage their emotions? And how best can parents determine whether their child or children has emotional issues that stem from these areas?
Thank you for the question. It's a great question, because as I spoke about the tantrums and the meltdowns and the emotional communication, or the dysfunctional responses to overwhelming emotions, that happens in normally functioning children, but also there is such a thing as psychological evaluation for children, because there's child psychologists or those psychologists who specialize in children. right? And so when we submit our children to evaluations, they could determine if there is a learning disorder, if there is an issue with sensory processing, which is causing them to respond so charged to emotions that they can't process or feelings that they can't control, or even if it's something more advanced such as autism or ADHD. I mean, on the autism spectrum, meltdowns are really regular, something that happens regularly. And so if we get into some of those circles with the parents or the caregivers for autistic children, you see that autistic children are they're so very intelligent. They don't necessarily have learning disorders, but they do have sensory processing disorders, and they're not necessarily equipped to be able to express or communicate the things that they want to say. And so a deeper psychological evaluation from a professional would be able to help you as a parent or caregiver determine if the child indeed is normally functioning and just needs an environmental change, or if there's something deeper at play, such as ADHD or even early onset anxiety or depression.
Awesome. Thank you for answering that question wonderfully. Jessie.
Give me 1 second, please.
Okay, I will read another question while Jessie is doing something. Should I be concerned if my 3-year-old goes up to strangers in the shop and want to go off with the person?
Should you be concerned? Yes, because it speaks to the attachment style of the child. When we spoke about the secure attachment style would see a child being very attached to their parents and very attached to those family members who are in their immediate circle. And so a child who has a secure attachment style would be very attuned to the parent and connected to the immediate caregivers, and there's extreme stranger danger. However, when we go into the ambivalent side of things, where the child is wary of strangers, but not avoidant of the strangers, that speaks to a need for a deeper connection. I mean, I know that there's some children who are just friendly, right? Because their parents are raising them to be friendly. But if at a certain age, there's not an expected, especially at 3, there's not an expected amount or manageable amount of stranger danger, and there's no fear for strangers at all, then that is maybe characteristic or symptomatic of a deeper relationship that is needed between the child and parent.
Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Jessie, you ready now?
Yes. I had it on it one. What tips do you recommend in disciplining a 2-year-old that throws tantrums when he or she doesn't get their way?
That's a good one. Well, the first tip that I would recommend is to you, the parents, stay calm. First step is to stay calm, because I've seen, as you said, parents who believe that if my child goes there and I give them a signal, or I give them a finger or the eye, which used to work for the older ones. We got that when we were younger. Some parents believe that if I default to that signal and it's not working, then I should, try to heavy hand or do the upper hand thing with the children. But I would say if you have a 2-year-old or 3-year-old who is throwing a tantrum, the first thing you do is you stay calm for yourself, so that you're able to process and go through the whole what, why, where. So the what is, before you approach the child, while you are calming down, you can try to observe the environment and pay attention to what they may have been doing before. Analyze the immediate environment to see if there's any immediate presenting source of danger or any immediate presenting frustrating factor that would be causing the child to be overwhelmed in a sensory way. And then you can perhaps try to remove that. But when you get calm, then you go down to the level of the child, eye to eye, and then you go into the second phase, which is the why. And then you can ask them, why, what is happening, and so on. If the child insists, and I say insist because there's a level of intentionality, if the child insists that this attention is not enough, then what you can do there in the same calm tone is establish a boundary to the child. So you can say to the child, when you are speaking at the level that mommy is speaking, and when you stop shouting, and when you are ready to come and tell mommy what's going on or tell daddy what's going on, then we'll have the conversation. In the meanwhile, I will give you some time. I will give you some time for you to chill out. Because the thing is, we believe that 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds can't understand all of our words. I mean, if we try to talk to them too advanced, maybe they won't. But if we use very simple, clear, understandable language, children will understand. So it's important for us to, 1, get calm, 2, come down to their level, go into the why phase. Why are you crying? What is wrong? And if after giving the attention, they're still insisting on pursuing the tantrum for a little bit longer to get a little bit more attention, then you can set a boundary and say, when you're speaking to mommy like this, when you're speaking to daddy like this, when you come down to this tone, when you are ready to communicate, I am here to support you, but I am not going to deal with you. I'm not going to go in this anger dance with you. That's one of the practical tips that we can do.
Okay, so we also have a question from YouTube as well, but I would read that question when I'm finished reading the one from Zoom.
Okay.
How do you deal with a child who adapts to anything, meaning if you take their toys away, they cry for a short while, then get over it? The same goes for taking away their tablets or banning them from going somewhere they would like to go. So any type of punishment doesn't really seem to work. Putting them in a corner by themselves also doesn't seem to work.
Yeah, this one is unique because it speaks to some avoidance or some avoidant personality styles developing there. Avoidant just in the case of I'm not necessarily attached to anything. I'm not necessarily attached to any one thing and I can adjust. It's not necessarily a bad thing when you see it manifesting in a child, because what it means is that the child can be at an advanced stage for their age of emotional processing where they understand, yes, I am being denied this privilege, but this is not the end of the world. And most times children tend to act on extremes. So we know that if you take something away from them, you're expecting an extreme reaction. Or if you give them something that makes them very happy, you're expecting an extreme reaction. It does happen and it is anticipated. However, if the child is not responding to traditional privations or taking away privileges, it simply can mean that the child is at an advanced stage of emotional processing and communication. And so we can try to do talk interventions instead of denying privilege, disciplinary tactics or disciplinary ways. I lost my words there for a bit.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes, Brother Charles.
Yes, sir.
I just wanted to elaborate a bit on flexibility and the role in boundaries.
Okay, no problem. Now, the flexibility, what I was saying before the flexibility is, it is expected in every child or child caregiver, child parent relationship. It is expected that there is room to allow a child to develop independence, to allow a child to emotionally develop and to experience things on their own. And so we can train up a child in the way that he is to go or she is to go. And we can see that when they come to a particular age that they are veering in a direction or they may be showing interest in something that we are not necessarily comfortable with. What some parents try to do is to shut it down altogether and use the upper hand technique where they say, I am the parent, you are the child, and you will do this. Flexibility now, when we're coming out of that, giving them some independence to explore and take some emotional or psychological advantage, the flexibility here now also speaks to you as the parent not wanting your child to experience negative emotions, negative experiences, or not wanting your child to see you as their villain or as their enemy. You, the parent, would say, even though there's an expectation of this kind of behavior, when you contravene that or when you violate this boundary, that I, the parent, even though I know that I should discipline you, I don't want to discipline you because I don't want you to experience negative emotions. I don't even want you to see me as being a bad person or see me as being an enemy. When, especially as your children come into the age of, or come into the season of adolescence, there is going to be some opposition, for want of a better term, because your children are becoming a lot more independent thinkers, independent feelers, and they are living somewhat outside of you. And so there is to be room for flexibility in terms of you establish the boundaries and you see that there's a violation of boundary, which may not necessarily be disrespectful, but this child is simply trying to achieve some independence of thought and independence of feeling. There can be given some flexibility for that. But if the flexibility is on the basis that I don't want to be seen as a bad parent, or I don't want to be seen as an angry person, or I don't want to be seen, or as being a disciplinarian, and I want to be my child's friend. I want to be, always be viewed as a positive, in a positive light from my child. Then that flexibility in which we allow them to violate the boundaries and not reward or reform the behavior, that flexibility will breed familiarity, and very soon your child develops into contempt or outright disrespect for you. Because they know that when they do things, because you, the parent, want so much to be seen as the good guy, you just allow them to get away with anything.
Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, there was another question. It says, how can we build the children who are so angry already? What remedies, strategies can we use as leaders of the young people?
Okay, so for children who are so angry, now let's go back to one of the things that we saw earlier in the discussion, which is anger is a healthy emotion. And when there is what is determined to be an excessive outburst or an excessive demonstration of behavior rooted in anger, that is always symptomatic of something that's deeper. So if a child is very angry and you find that there's like everything that you're trying to do or your ways of intervening, they're not as successful as it could be, then what might be required is a change of approach. And so there's some strategy that we need to implement in our approach. And so I tell people, especially when you're dealing with teens, those who are coming out of advanced childhood and crossing over into adolescence, when you're dealing with teens who seem to be very angry about certain things, then what you want to do is strategize by building trust first. And building trust might simply mean that you change your approach and you start to have conversations with them about non-confrontational subjects. Like you intentionally avoid triggering things or triggering conversations where there's the potential of you having to come and again set another reinforcement and say, this is how it should be done, this is what we should do. But you approach it from maybe just talking about something like that they like, that they're not going to receive any judgment if they share their views on it. And from there, we build some trust and we open and we widen the communication channels. And so once we get them to trust us, in trusting us, they feel safer with us. and then they can let us in behind the wall to see what is really going on or what is the real root of the anger. A lot of children tend to feel very powerless, especially teenagers, when they recognize that they want so much independence, but they can't have it just because they are still dependent on their parents for sustenance and everything else. It makes them feel so kind of powerless. And so some children, instead of aggressively exploding, they do a lot of silent temper tantrums, and they just have nothing to say, and they just avoid you, or they just kind of pull away from you. But all of that is just an attempt to communicate that there's something deeper that I want that I'm unable to have. But if you make them feel safe to communicate, safe to open up, safe to talk, then they can do to allow you to see behind the wall that they've put up. And this wall is a wall of anger.
Okay, so we have another question from Patricia Allen. She says, is there any danger in mostly resorting to physical discipline when dealing with a toddler, especially when it seems to work better than talking?
Danger is a strong word. It's because some toddlers, I mean, while we have a general expectation for emotional processing and understanding what's happening around you as a toddler. Because of that, some people may say you can discipline a child, but don't be too physically aggressive with a child, especially at 2 or 3, when they're still fragile to an extent. And you as the parent may not have the best control over your anger. And so your physical discipline might descend into physical abuse. That is something to pay attention to. But I would always say when it comes to disciplining your child, if you recognize that physical contact in terms of maybe lashes or spanking on their hand or whatever you might do to physically intervene and regulate the situation and bring the child under control, if it's working for you, go ahead. But if you know that as a parent or the caregiver, you have some anger issues and you are further triggered when your child doesn't seem to be compliant or responsive to your first attempts of discipline, yeah, there's where the danger is, because you can, unbeknownst to you, descend into the realms of physical abuse, and that now develops a trauma for your child at a later age, where they are more susceptible to being or engaging in an abusive relationship, or they themselves can become abusers or bullies because they have conditioned control and getting one's way. They have conditioned themselves and associated that to physical violence or physical contact. So that's a potential danger there.
Right, so there was another question, and it says, how would you classify a child who demonstrates meltdowns at schools but not at home?
My first question would be, what is the quality of emotional communication at home? Is there even emotional communication at home? Does the child feel safe and securely attached to the parent, or is the child so afraid of the parent that they know that, okay, I can't do this at home because there might be some negative consequences, but maybe I will try so in school where I can get some more measure of attention. Now, if we are talking about a meltdown, remember that a meltdown then is uncontrollable. And if a meltdown is uncontrollable, unconnected to sensory overload, then the possibility is that there is something, or there's an environment at school that is contributing to sensory overload or a stimuli overload. And so the child may need to move classes, the child may need to move teachers, or the child may even need to move schools. Because then if we are saying that at home, all is well on the emotional front, and the environment is regulated enough where nothing is done in excess. However, at the school, there may be some factor that's out of whack, maybe too loud of music, or maybe too much uncontrollable children are not respecting boundaries, the child may be bullied. Whatever it is that is causing an overwhelm or sensory overload at the school, if we have seen it as an isolated event, then chances are we may need to move them out of that environment into a healthier one.
Yes, so true. So true. We have a question from
Thank
Rosalia.
you. Thank you. Well said.
You're welcome.
I totally agree. We have a question from Rosalia. What can you do to help a child who sees consequences as unfair and they want to go where there are no consequences for ill behavior?
So if the child is doing this consequence analysis and that is between two parents or two different locations for caregiving, maybe at the parent's home versus the grandmother's home, or at this particular aunt's home versus the parent's home, then it speaks to the adults or the caregivers now needing to communicate to find out what's happening. And there needs to be some attention being paid to what are the differences, like a spot the differences exercise between this household and that household. If it is between two parents who are maybe estranged based on separation or divorce and so on, and there is that unspoken battle for wanting to be the better parent and the nicer parent and to be the good guy, then there might be a situation where on one side it's just absolute flexibility or excessive flexibility, which is breeding familiarity. And on the other side, it's just the child is not accustomed or is just not in agreement with boundaries being set. But we have to remind ourselves and just to keep in mind that up to a certain age, especially within childhood, crossing over into adolescence, children are processing, developing, assimilating, adjusting, storing information. And as they get older and they become more independent thinkers, it's okay for a child to feel differently. It's okay for a child to want to experience something that's different to what you are presenting. But there's a reason why the Bible says train up a child in the way that they should go. Because the expectation is that the parent or the caregiver, you know better. In some cases, you should know best. But you know better because you're advanced and you have walked this road before. And so there are some children who may not like the consequences, or they may not like what they deem to be unfair, but that unfairness is just them communicating that I don't understand why I can't have that, and I'm not yet at the stage of experience for me to understand why I can't have it. So even though you may be suggesting this to me and it is the best thing for me, I still am entitled to not like it, and I may either throw an outright tantrum or I might throw a silent temper tantrum, whatever it is, but it's understandable. It's very, very okay for that to happen. If, however, it is a manipulation of trying to pit one household against the other or one parent against the other, then both parents should present a united front so that they can nip that in the bud.
Okay, I see we have a hands up from Sister Abigail, but before we go to her, Chessie, could you read the other question, please?
All right. It says, I thought I had a close relationship with my 3-year-old, but you said that my child may not be attached to me as he wants to go off with a stranger. Yeah, what should I do? That's the question.
Okay. The first thing, if we were working together in a session, the first thing I would ask is, how much time do you spend with the child? And who are the other caregivers in the child's life at this stage? I know that for some people, dependent on their domestic situation, environment, if it's a single parent, if it's, again, estranged parents, divorced parents, or whatever, and you now have the task of raising the child alone, and you have to enlist the help of other caregivers, then there is the understandable normal risk that the attachment style between parent and child is going to be affected because for unavoidable reasons, the parent needs to be out of the home. However, if it is such where the parent is making it a point to spend that time, getting to understand the child, paying attention to them, okay, saying school and parents, paying attention to them, and doing all that they can do to ensure that they attach to their child, but the child is still wanting to go off to somewhere else, then it may be because of the style of care or the attachments that are being formed from the other caregivers. So if it's a school, if they're at preschool while you're at work, then it may be that the preschool teachers and so on are doing something different to condition the child emotionally that may be pulling them away from you, because what you are coming back to give them is not what they are accustomed to or what they're becoming accustomed to. But if it's such where you are primarily in your child's life and your child is not really being exposed to many other caregivers at this age and stage, then it may speak to you having to change your approach, do some more child-led activities where you can really, from a controlled environment or controlled perspective, see what are the things that are interesting in your child, and you can get into that or pour more energy into that so that your child can feel you being more interested in them, and that may contribute to a closer relationship between parent and child.
Brother Charles.
So much. Great, awesome source.
No
Mrs.
problem.
Abigail, you can go ahead now.
Okay. I have a question, and also I just want to comment a little on what you spoke about with respect to attachment to the caregiver. So I've had an experience with that, and Letitia would know who I'm speaking about. Before I had a maid, there was this babysitter, Auntie Joy. I would notice that every time people drop their children by her, when they come for the children in the evening, they don't want to go with the parent. They want to stay with Auntie Joy. So one who doesn't know her would believe that something is going on in the home. The child don't want to go back home, right? Mm-hmm. So then I came and I had my child, and I say, well, I know my child would want to come back home with me. And then I took Amelie there, and when I went back for her, she didn't want to come back. She wanted to stay with Auntie Joy. And I was like, what is she doing to these children that makes them not want to go back home in the evening, but want to stay with her? So then I came and I had my son, and I said, okay, right, this one, not going to be like that. And the same thing happened. He did not want to come home. He wanted to stay with Auntie Joy. And I spent like half a day with Auntie Joy one day, and I saw what she did. She loved them up. When they reach in the morning, is loving evermore. She would pray with them. Babies, she would pray with them. She putting on praise and worship songs, even though they can't understand certain things. She'll be reading little memory verse from the Bible. Just the kind of the way in which she brought them up. Well, of course, when they reached 3 years, they would leave by her. But the way in which she took care of them, and she always used to say, my children, and if one is sick, she feels sad, you know. So I don't know if that, because of that now, even though you are the parent, when you come for the child in the afternoon, they're not ready to leave Auntie Joy. They want to stay with Auntie Joy, even though they know that you are mommy or you are daddy. They are not that you're beating them or anything. They just want to stay with Auntie Joy. You understand? And also, yeah, the question that I have for you is, what would you say about a child who is continuously seeking attention? A child as in a little child or a teenager, but they're just continuously seeking attention. It's not like if the parent not spending time with him or her, you know, they're just constantly doing things, even if it's something to make you buff them up or whatever. It's just to get your attention.
Okay, so the question again I would ask is the parent spending time with them? Is the parent spending time with the child, or is the parent really spending time with the child? Sometimes I've worked with modern day parents, and they think that helping you do homework or getting you ready for school, which can be used as a bonding time, but I've seen some parents, because they themselves struggle with empathy, they themselves struggle with emotional regulation, they themselves struggle with time management. You see, then there are things or moments when you can use that to create bonding between parent and child. Something as simple as if you're picking out something for the child to wear, if it's not a uniform bound engagement, involving the child in what do you want to wear? You like this? You want, show mommy what you want to wear, show daddy what you want to wear. I mean, if you are not giving the child some room to explore and to become adventurous and just engage, and then reaffirm that and celebrate that and these different things. If we're not using these real moments in between the business of life to really connect and attach to your child, and then you're thinking on what spending time with the child is, maybe again giving them a device or letting them stay with a device because the devices keep them quiet, and you in one place and they're in one place. While there might be some room for that in development, I think to a large extent we have lost the understanding, or we have lost sight of the fact that parents, caregivers are the primary source of validation, affirmation, attention, reassurance for children. And so if you have a child who is constantly attention seeking, you may tell yourself, well, I know I spend time with my child, but the question might be, do you spend enough time with your child, or do you spend the right quality of time with your child? Because there's a difference between quality time and quantity time. Some parents think, well, okay, I give you a little quality time, but quantity time might be the case too, because some children just want you. Some children just want to be made to feel in the moment that I am special, I matter, I am important, and I want a little attention. And if they repeatedly don't have that core emotional need met, then you might see a lot more tantrums and outbursts and cries for attention, but it's just really speaking to a deeper emotional need. It's not necessarily the child is trying to be an annoyance, but the child is crying out because there's a deeper emotional need.
Okay, I saw that Brother D's hand was up, but before we go to you, we have another question. What is the difference between a panic attack and an anxiety attack and a nervous breakdown?
Okay, well, a panic attack or anxiety attack is when there is a diagnosable case of anxiety. Anxiety is, in short, is a response to fearful thoughts. It's a response to thoughts of overwhelm, thoughts that are connected to a traumatic experience and a trigger. So, for example, if a child would have been taken to the beach for the first time, or a kid went to the beach for the first time, and the first time they went into the water, a fish came and nibbled on their foot, and they were not prepared for it. They could scream, there's an outburst, there's fear, there's an attack because I do not know what happened. And then that now, as simple as it may seem, has developed a trigger, or is an observable trigger for that child, because now anytime they are brought back to the water, they don't want to go in, and you're telling them, come and go in the water, nothing wrong with that. And they are screaming and they are hyperventilating and so on. And it's not because it's random, but because this anxiety attack or this panic attack is connected specifically to a trigger that is in the environment. Now, because meltdowns are also connected to triggers, we might tell ourselves that, okay, a meltdown and a panic attack is the same thing. And to some extent, especially with an older person, if anxiety overwhelms them or panic overwhelms them, they may have a meltdown. But meltdowns more so are connected to sensory overload. And so if there's too much brightness, there's too much noise, if there's too much volume, if the approach to the child is too aggressive, that now could cause the child to descend into a state of overwhelm. And that's where that response is coming from, because their senses are overloaded and they don't know how to process everything at the same time. Whereas a panic attack is connected to a fearful thought or a thought that is triggered by a traumatic memory.
Awesome. Brother D, you can go ahead now.
Yes, Brother Charles. Can a tantrum turn into a meltdown? And if so, what are some of the causes?
Can a tantrum turn into a meltdown? That's a very good question. Most meltdowns start off by looking like tantrums, because tantrums are, as we say, characterized by crying and screaming and ranting, and there is some aggressive behavior in tantrums that might be observable in meltdowns as well. But the thing is, the response and the attempts for intervention and the response of the child to your attempts to intervene will help you to differentiate if it's a tantrum or if it's a meltdown. Reminder that a tantrum is all about getting your attention and all about seeking some validation in the moment. It's about wanting to know that this need that I have is important enough that I can get your attention. However, a meltdown, even when you try to intervene, it doesn't work. Talking is not working. Trying to shake them up is not working. And so a meltdown requires a more, I don't want to say a more strategic approach, because a tantrum is also, you have to be strategic with the talk intervention, but a meltdown does require you to sometimes physically move them to a different space so that they can have time to self-soothe, they can have time to be pacified, and they can come down out of that uncontrollable environment. But a tantrum, if it does not descend into, them not being controlled or them not responding to, if they are responding to your talk therapy, chances are it's just a tantrum and it's not necessarily a meltdown that they have.
All right. There's a question. What would say about a child or teenager who is uncomfortable or avoids or cringes at praise, compliments, or being the center of attention?
What would I say for a child who cringes and comfortable or is basically uncomfortable with being the center of attention or receiving praise?
Yes.
That can speak to, again, attachment style, and that can speak to the emotional conditioning that they would have received coming up in a household. If it's a narcissistic parenting household, if you're coming up in a narcissistic household where the parent is expecting you to be this way because the parent themselves is narcissistic and they believe that everything connected to them must be special, must be bright, must be, a shining star. If that is the case, and the child is coming up in that, any time the child misses the opportunity to satisfy this narcissistic parent's expectation, and there is an outburst, that can cause the child to have a traumatic response, or that could be a traumatic trigger, because now anytime they are going to do something or do something special, unless they are being reinforced with positive rewards, with reminders that they are special, that this is good, that, we are proud of you and so on, then that can help to undo that narcissistic injury. But if it's simply a case where the child is just definitely not comfortable with it, I mean, it's not necessarily something to be too worried about. I can say that because I myself was one of those children who was very uncomfortable with praise, very uncomfortable with being the center of attention. And even now as an adult, I'm still very uncomfortable with being the center of attention. So when the spotlight is on me for too much, it has developed something in me called the imposter syndrome, where I know what I know, but at the same time, I still kind of psych myself out and I don't know how to receive compliments. But of course, I've come to understand that this is all rooted in the mind, and I can think myself into a different space because now I'm emotionally advanced. I'm, mentally advanced. But if it's a child, it may just be a phase of developing and processing stimuli around them. They may be responding to inconsistencies in the parents. But if it's a situation where a child is just uncomfortable with praise at a particular age and stage, give them some time. That's one of the good things about children. Who we see a child to be at 6 is not necessarily who they're going to be at 16. Who a child is at 10 is not necessarily who the child is going to be at 12. However, we just have to ensure that we are creating an environment of trust and safety around this child so that they can know if you do something well, you're going to be rewarded positively. If you're going to be complimented, you're going to be acknowledged and praised. But if you do something that needs reformation or needs some reforming or adjustment in the behavior, there are going to be corrective consequences.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. We have one last question because it is getting late and I understand that we all have other things to attend to. So the last question says, Is it better for a parent to remove themselves and child or children from a home environment that is toxic, where one parent frequently gets meltdown and is making no effort to seek help for themselves?
Yes. My simple answer to that question is yes. We can't believe that toxicity only affects the adults. Toxicity definitely affects children as well. And so if we are in a home where we believe that we have to stay for the child because we believe that maybe a two-parent home is better than a two-parent home that's dysfunctional is better than a one-parent home that may be more functional and emotionally safe for the child, then we are sadly mistaken. And so I would recommend to everybody, do not leave a child in an environment of toxicity. Yes, it may be a very guttural decision, a deep decision for the person to say, okay, you know, I really need to walk away from this, because maybe for the adult, moving away from this other adult who's having meltdowns and anger issues and being abusive, it's an issue for them with their attachment to that. And so they want to kind of have the child be remaining in this system, and I want to try to shield the child while they're in an environment of toxicity. But because children are younger adults, children are human beings as well, and they have emotions, they are able to process, they are able to know things that you think they don't know. And so remove them from the toxicity, remove yourself from the toxicity, because if not, in the end, it leads the child to develop some severe behavioral disorders and some emotional dysregulation.
Okay, then. Thank you so much, Dallison.
You are welcome, Abigail.
Accepting the call and
Welcome.
for such a very informative session and for answering the questions so clearly.
May God be the glory. No problem.
I trust that we would not just leave here and say it was a great session, but we would be able to take away something and do something different in our own family lives that would better help our children. Ellie?
Yes, hi, good evening, everyone. Are you hearing me properly?
Yes, we are.
Yes. Okay, so wow, wonderful session and information. Dallison, we would like to thank you on behalf of the Longdenville SDA Church and particularly the AY department. It was a real blessing. The presentation was very insightful and informative, presenting on such a topic very pertinent. And I can't even say thank you enough. It was wonderful. And I am pretty sure we would want to have you back again because the session was so well done. So thank you. I pray that God continues to bless you and use you in your ministry, because this is ministry. So thank you once again, and all God's blessings on you and your family. All right, so I am seeing the chat is still going up. Persons are interested in direct trading and all sorts of things. So thank you.
But what I would do is I would put my contact information in the chat, so persons can reach out to me if they need any support. I'll put my contact information in the chat.
Okay, and for those of you who truly enjoyed today, we want to invite you for part 2 next week that deals with how parents' anger and jealousy damage the children after a divorce. How parents' anger and jealousy damages the children after a divorce. So feel free to tune in to Longdenville SDA AY next Sabbath, August the 14th. We're going to ask Brother Crandon to do the consecration prayer, please.
Okay, I'm not sure if he's on. Hello, Crandon, you there?
Well,
all right, if not, yeah, no problem. Okay, yes, he's there. Okay, let's pray. Our loving Father and God, with grateful hearts, we say thank you for a wonderful Sabbath that has gone into eternity. We thank you in a special way, dear God, for all the benefits, dear God, we would have experienced today, even from prayer to this program. We want to thank you so much for the ministry of Brother Charles. We thank you for an excellent job this afternoon. We pray in a special way, dear God, as we continue to raise children, dear God, understanding that you said children, they are a heritage unto you. And you, even as you walked on this earth, you said, suffer the little children to come unto me. As a child, you go, God, you too was a wonderful child. So, dear God, we thank you for children, and we know that your eyes are always on them. And we ask that you continue, dear God, to build a hedge around them, to protect them, dear God, and to keep them safe. This evening, in a special way, we want to lift up the parents. Dear God, the parents up to you, dear God, that as parents seek to raise children according, dear God, to the precepts of God, we pray that you will grant them wisdom, knowledge, understand them, give them the know it all, the wherewithal, give them the wisdom, give them the patience, give them the tact, give them the grace. Oh God, give them everything that is needed, dear God, to bring up these wonderful young ones, these beautiful hearts into gems for your kingdom in a special way. We pray, oh God, that parents, dear God, as they seek you, that they will work out with you, dear God, what is needed, dear God, so that as they commune with you, dear God, you can inspire them so that they, dear God, in so passing it on to their children, can be able to share love and joy and peace and patience, even all the things that we would have learned this afternoon. We thank you in a special way, dear God, that you would have not left parents without, dear God, but even through the pen of inspiration, dear God, there are so much information, dear God, so many strategies and stuff that can be used for the children. This evening, oh God, we pray and we consecrate parents, mothers, fathers, single fathers, dear God, that as they continue to consecrate their lives to you, dear God, as they reach out to you for wisdom and knowledge, that you, oh God, will reveal yourself to them, that you will lead, you will guide, and you will direct. For your word says, train up a child in the way they should go, and when they are old, they will not depart. We thank you for your word, dear God. We thank you for this evening, dear God, and may you continue to hold parents close to your heart as you continue to inspire them. May they continue to pass it on to their children so that they can raise great gems for your kingdom. We thank you and we praise you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. So thank you again, everyone, for coming. And I wish you all a happy, safe, and wonderful week ahead. I also want to say thank you again to Villa SDA for joining us and all the other visitors who would have joined us this afternoon. So have a wonderful night.
You too. Thank you so much. Thanks again, Delison.
Good night.
Good night. Good night. Blessing to everyone.
Hello, Brother John. Good night.
Thank you very much.
Villa, you all are invited to our program next week as well.
Okay, thanks for the invitation.
Look, Grandpa.
Yes.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
You're welcome. Goodbye.
Amelia and Chelsea, you both did an excellent job. Congratulations.
Yes, I am so sorry.
Thank you. Thank you.
I forgot to thank them.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chessie and Amelie. Great
That's
job.
true.
Thank you.
Check Amelie.
Oh gosh. Ah boy. Mommy and daughter. All right, later.
Eliel, thank you also. I'm not sure if you're there. And everyone who took part with the welcome, the scripture reading, the prayer, opening prayer, everything. Thank you all.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Grandpa.
Yeah, okay, sister. Amelia got you here?
Yes, Grandpa.
Bye-bye.
Bye.